All right, today we're jumping into a really powerful piece of ancient writing from the book of Hosea. It's this incredible story about love, rebellion, and a response to betrayal that is so unexpected. Honestly, it turns our whole idea of justice completely on its head.
And it all kicks off with this single verse. Right away, the prophet Hosea gives us this deeply personal image that frames everything else we're about to hear. The whole dynamic shifts. This isn't a king talking to his subjects anymore. No, this is far more intimate. It's a parent talking about their child.
Now, if you've been reading Hosea up to this point, you'll know the main metaphor has been about a husband and his unfaithful wife. But right here in chapter 11, the story pivots. It moves to a different kind of relationship, one that's maybe even more foundational.
So, the scholar Dr. John Oswalt, whose analysis we're leaning on here, points out that this isn't just swapping one image for another. It's going deeper. See, a marriage is a partnership you choose. It's built on a covenant. But the bond between a parent and child, that's inherent. It speaks to a love that was there from the very beginning of their existence.
This parent-child metaphor completely reframes God's motivation for us. We're not talking about a king who's demanding obedience just because he can. This is about a parent's love. A love that is personal, tender, and focused on training and discipline, that comes from a place of care, not a thirst for control.
So you'd think, right, that this kind of deep, loving call would get an equally loving response. But that's not what happens, not even close. The text describes this really strange and, frankly, tragic reaction. And this verse, right here, just captures the heartbreaking paradox of the whole story. The more the parent calls out, the faster the child runs in the other direction. It's not just that they're indifferent, it's active, intentional resistance. Which brings us to this really fundamental question that Dr. Oswalt brings up, one that I think gets right to the core of the human condition. Why on earth would someone run away from a loving call? Well, the answer seems to be deep in our psychology. Think about it. Any real relationship requires commitment, and that commitment, well, it demands some level of submission, of surrender. You have to be willing to let go of your own way, just a little, to walk with someone else. So the root of this rebellion is a deep, stubborn resistance to that surrender. It's that voice inside that says, I want what I want, and it sees any call to submit as a threat to its own control.
Okay, so if the people are rejecting a relationship with God because it means they have to surrender, where do they go instead? Well, they turn to something they think they can control.
And this leads us straight to the idea of idolatry. And listen, this isn't just about ancient statues made of wood and stone. An idol is anything we set up to provide for our own needs on our own terms. It's our strategy for managing life and getting what we want without ever having to surrender to someone or something we can't completely command.
Dr. Oswalt breaks down this whole thought process. It starts with a real need, a real desire. But then comes that powerful urge to control how that need gets met. So we find or create an idol, something we think we can manage to get the outcome we want. But the key word here, and it's a big one, is illusion. We might feel like we're in control, but it's a fragile self-deception. It's just a way to avoid being vulnerable. And let's be honest, this ancient problem is still a huge part of our world today. Like Dr. Oswalt points out, Jesus talked about this exact issue when he said, you can't serve both God and mammon, which is just an old word for money. One of the biggest modern idols that promises us security and control.
So after the text describes this deep-seated rebellion and where it leads, the whole tone just flips on a dime. All of a sudden, we're given this raw, unfiltered look into God's internal conflict.
And just like that, the tone isn't about judgment anymore. It's about this profound sorrow. This is the cry of a parent who's watching their kid walk straight toward disaster. And you can just feel the pain of having to let them go.
I mean, listen to that language. This is not some distant, angry king. This is personal anguish. The original Hebrew word here actually suggests a heart that's being overturned, just churned up inside with grief. It's incredibly vivid.
And then we get the climax of this whole internal struggle. After all the betrayal, all the rebellion, the final movement inside God's heart isn't toward more anger or wrath. It's toward this overwhelming, warm, tender compassion.
Dr. Oswalt says this is one of the most poignant glimpses into God's heart in the entire Bible. And it shows this stark, stunning contrast. You know, our typical human reaction, driven by pride and self-preservation, is to say, you messed up, you'll get what you deserve, I'm done. But the divine response, born out of this deep relational love, is the heartbreaking question, how can I possibly let you go?
This huge difference between our reaction and God's reaction, well, it leads us to the chapter's ultimate statement, and what is probably the most important takeaway of the whole thing.
Now, this deep compassion doesn't just erase the consequences. That's really key. The people are still going to face exile. But God makes it crystal clear that his final goal, his ultimate intention, is not their destruction. The purpose of all their hardship is something else entirely.
And Dr. Oswalt uses this really powerful image to explain it: the refiner's fire. The fire of exile isn't meant to burn them to ashes. No, it's meant to purify. It's designed to take something fragile, what he calls bales of hay, and through that intense pressure, transform it into something incredibly strong and resilient, like Damascus steel. The hardship has a purpose, and that purpose is transformation.
This idea completely reframes how we might look at suffering, doesn't it? It suggests that even inside the most painful consequences of our own choices, there can be a loving, transformative purpose at work. It's a challenging thought, for sure, and it leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on. If God's love isn't about stopping us from ever feeling pain, but is instead about refining us through it, well, how does that change our story?